Hello, and how are you? My name is Winnie Barawa, and this is Medic Academy, where we do classes and lessons on different aspects of health-related matters. And in today's class, we are going to cover gender analysis frameworks. Now, in our introduction on gender issues, we discussed about frameworks and defined that these are tools that will help us gather information and data in relation to gender, specifically when you're performing an analysis. So a quick one, it's being known that women spend more time or spend 2.5 times as much time on unpaid care compared to men when it comes to domestic work. And with the existence of these frameworks, we are therefore able to get a difference on how it works and which frameworks are in place that allows us to analyze the different aspects of gender. Let's first play an introduction and understand what are the gender analysis frameworks. What are they? How exactly are they of importance? And if you're going to conduct a gender analysis, then which areas or which aspects should your gender analysis cover? So it's very key for you to understand that gender frameworks are a step-by-step tools for carrying out gender analysis. And what they do is they help us to raise questions and then analyze information and develop strategies to increase women and men representation and participation in policies, projects, and programs. So these are tools that will help us to conduct our gender analysis. But these tools, they're like the questionnaires you raise when you're going to do data collection and research. So they will raise questions, they will help you develop strategies so that you can be able to understand the differences between men and women, but also it will increase the participation of these particular genders when it comes to policies, projects, and also programs. So with the tools, or rather with the frameworks, what they do is they help us get differences between gender equalities. They also help us to identify and look at the gender roles and relationship that is existing between our men and women and come up with better ways of handling these particular areas. So what are the common gender analysis frameworks? There are many, and as you keep revising or reading, you will find many other gender analysis tools or frameworks. And so the commonest one are the ones I'll highlight here, where we have the gender role framework, also known as the Havard framework, the triple roles framework that was developed by Carolyn Moser. Then we have the Web of Institutionalization framework by Caren Levy. Then you have the Gender Analysis Matrix, commonly known as GAAIM. We also have Equality and Empowerment Framework by Sara Longwe, Capability and Vulnerability Framework, People-Oriented Planning Framework, that is POP, and the Social Relations Framework. There are very many, but we will just discuss a few of these so that you can see what these frameworks have and how they're developed and which areas they focus more on. So they don't look at the same things. Different frameworks look at different areas of the gender issues. So, for example, the Harvard Analytical Framework is also known as the Gender Role Framework. So if you hear Harvard Analytical Framework and Gender Role Framework, they just mean the same thing. So what this framework does, it's being told that it helps in understanding the differences between men and women and how they participate in the economy. So in the economy here, we mean the way they're able to access and control resources and how they influence the gender role. So like we understand that men and women play different roles when it comes to economical activities and when it comes to economic roles. So the amount of contribution the men give and the amount of contribution women give towards the economy development is a bit different. So what this framework does, it comes into looking at how do men and women participate in improving our economy. But to achieve this, they look at 4 interrelated components. So they analyze 4 key components of our framework. So these are the components you need to look at. They analyze the activity profile, they analyze the access and control profiles, and then they analyze influencing factors. So when it comes to analyzing activity profile, what they do is they analyze looking at who does what and what is the relevance when it comes to productivity to the economy. So for instance, if they're looking at men, what is the role of men, let's say in security of the country, that is. So maybe they can go into areas and see if it is the armed forces or if it is the security firms, how many men are there and how many women are there. Is it relevant? Is it productive enough? Is it reproductive? And then we have the second and third profiles where we talk about the access and control profiles. So with the access and control profile, they look at the resources that are used in identifying these tasks. And then they look at who can access and control over these resources. So you need to appreciate that some resources men tend to have more control over compared to women. Well, there are some resources that women tend to have more control and access compared to others. So with the analytical framework, looking at the contribution the different genders are doing and the access and control they have to these resources, then you're able to see, for example, if it is farms, and these farms are agricultural lands or agricultural farms, who has more control over them and who has more access over them. So that you can see if it's in agriculture, who contributes more to this economical agenda. Is it women who contribute more to agriculture or is it men who contribute more to this? And then we look at the influencing factor, which is the fourth factor here or the fourth component. So with the influencing factor, the key area is identify factors that cause the differences in the gender roles, which are being identified in the aforementioned profile. So here we are looking at factors that affect the activity, factors that affect the access, and factors that affect the control. So appreciating that the women work, what they do is affected by different factors, and the men's work, or rather what they do, can also be affected by different factors. So we are exposing the factors that influence all these components that we've mentioned: activity, control, and access. So these are the areas that the Harvard Analytical Frameworks looks at the contribution that men and women have in their economy and looking at the components of activity, access, control, and influencing factors. Interlinking all these factors and appreciating that the economy is built by the participation of both men and women, but acknowledging that the influence is different when it comes to access and when it comes to the control of resources. Then the second framework that we're going to look at is the triple role framework, commonly known as the Moser conceptual framework. So what Moser conceptual framework does, its main focus, unlike Harvard framework, which looks at the economy, Moser looks at the gender role and their needs. So appreciating our culture and norms, it's known that men and women don't do the same work according to culture. Each gender was allocated specific roles. And so we're being told that these roles are different, and so the gender needs for these genders will be different. Looking at, let's say, in the household, men tends to be more on the handiwork, building the house, maintaining the structures and all that, and security and so on. For women, they're more into the nurture roles, cooking, cleaning, and all that. Now, looking at these roles and the needs, they'll vary. And so we're being told that under the triple role framework, the gender roles in our community are categorized mostly into three, where we have the reproductive role. So the reproductive roles are roles that focus on the household, things to do with food preparation, cleaning, access to water, and so on. And then we have the productive roles, which look into economic, or rather what we talk about economic generation, what brings money or what brings income to our household. So these productive roles will be different for men and will be different for women. And then the third category of gender role that exists in our culture is the community role, the participation in our social activity. It's known when it comes, let's say, to religion, men tend to be less while women tends to be more. But when it comes to roles like leadership roles, then men tends to take more power on that than women. And so it's being said that you need to appreciate these differences before you identify the needs that each and every gender are requiring. So you can't give a blanket gender need and expect it to cover the different roles that these genders play. So we are being told that if you're looking into achieving gender equality, then you need to appreciate that when you're identifying the roles, you need to balance and know which need will be covered more by this gender and which need is needed by the other gender. So they're saying, therefore, based on our gender roles, then we have two major needs or two major gender needs. So one of the gender needs is what we call the practical gender needs, PGN. So the practical gender needs, they're being told that these are needs that cover our daily lives. So how we access our healthcare services, how we access our food, how we access our drinking water and sanitations, generally daily lives, activities that make our gender relations, they rather maintain our gender relations stable. But again, we have the other type of need that we talk about, the strategic gender needs, where we are saying we are looking at needs that should be met so that we remove any potential harm that could lead to gender insubordination or gender risks. So for example, there could be needs you will need to end gender-based violence. You will need needs that will ensure we are eliminating, limited legal rights and access. So when you're looking at the triple role framework or Moser conceptual framework, your focus is understanding this gender, what role do they play, and for that, which need do we meet for them? So for example, if you go to a community and the challenge in that particular community is lack of access to safe drinking water. Now, when you find the problem is access to safe water, then the first question is who plays the role in accessing this safe water? So you look at the men. Is it the men who help in fetching water or is it the women who help in getting water? Once you establish that, then you can come back and say, so what are the needs that we need to meet for this community? So if you're creating the needs, then you're understanding that, okay, in this need that I'm meeting, my role is to ensure that there's clean water in this community. But who is more affected? Is it the women or is it the men? Based on who plays the role and who is more targeted by that particular needs. So in our next slide, I'll give an example of how the Moser conceptual framework looks at the situation and how you involve each gender so that the solution that is being given meets the needed need at that particular time. So here we have an example of a framework. So the gender needs assessment framework. So we've said, number one, the gender needs are in three. Sorry, the gender roles are in three. So we have the reproductive role, productive role, and the community role. But also we have the needs. So we have the practical needs and the strategic needs. So when you're analyzing these needs and when you're analyzing the roles, you need to appreciate that the gender participation is different, but the needs will basically also mean they'll be different. So for example, when you're giving or organizing a meeting that you are looking at the time favorable for both men and women, then you need to appreciate that meeting is going to affect all the roles in the community. So it's going to affect the women role, that means going to affect the reproductive role, the productive, and the community. And so the needs will cut across. But again, if you're training women to be operators, let's say machine operators, for example, then it means the machine operators, it's more of an income generating activity and it's going to contribute into the economy. So then the activity or the role being affected here is the productive role of women. But now, what are the gender needs? This will cater for both practical and the strategic needs. So this is how the framework is done. You look at the roles and then you compare the needs. Is a particular role being affected and is it going to affect a specific need? So that's how the framework is done. And this is what we call the triple role framework or the Moser conceptual framework. And then we have the third role or the third framework, what we call the gender analysis matrix framework. So with the gender analysis matrix framework, this is a framework that encourages analyzing community participation by looking into areas that will help us get the gender differences. So the matrix is looking at community participation and how we can get gender differences and how these differences can be blended. So we have the key areas that the gender analysis matrix frameworks looks into. And this is the labor. So the gender matrix looks at labor, it looks at time, it looks at resources, and then it looks at our sociocultural factors. So looking at these different aspects, the gender analysis matrix will now come and assess What is the difference in terms of labor provision between men and women? What are the differences when it comes to time, resources, and also the social cultural factors? But you can analyze this at different levels. You can analyze it at individual level, that is looking at men and women, or you can analyze it at the household level and community level. So let's get into an example so that you can understand how it's done. If you're developing a matrix, remember as a gender expert, you are looking at specific projects and the impact it has on different genders. And also you are looking at whatever framework you're using. So based on the framework you're using, then if you're using the matrix, then you will need to evaluate the 4 key areas against the key players. So the key 4 areas we've said is the labor, the time, the resources, and the culture. But the main players here are the women, men, household, and the community. So that's how this matrix is aligned. So when you're coming to analyze it, your main focus will be looking at the four key aspects and the players. So for example, this project that we are looking at here is the water maintenance project, trying to help in eliminating scarcity of water access and ensuring that the community can gain or can access water services. But now the approaches that we are being done with this project was to train people on water treatment tools and water treatment systems. So now in this particular community, when you're analyzing it, you're looking at the women, looking at the first player here being women. What will be the advantage to them when it comes to labor, time, resources, and culture? So being labor area will be like, if you provide more water to women, then it means they'll no longer need to transport water because they'll have a water pump near them. They'll be able to pump water for themselves and get it easily to their households. So the women will no longer need to transport water on their own. When it comes to time, it will save time for them. And then women can have more option now, like to have time to leisure, or they can use that time to go look for more work and generate income. But when it comes to resources, it means women can easily use the water to go either for gardening, for cooking, cleaning, whatever means they want to use it for. So that's the advantage under resources. And when it comes to culture, then you can look at culturally, the women will have need to walk either miles or kilometers to get this water. But now the water has come near. So what will they gain from? They'll means there'll be less time of moving. So there'll be reduction of mobility or time wastage on the road. And they can have more time for social interaction, especially during the water collection ends. Because it's being told that, water collection and daily activities in the communities is part of social interaction. So they can have more time for that. And you see, with that, you can see the effect also. It trickles down to men, it will trickle down to the household, and it will trickle down to the community. So the analysis will go downwards. For men, the advantages under labor is they'll have skills on water treatment system, building and maintenance. With time, it means now men they'll acquire training, building and maintenance, meaning it will take time away from their other activities. Outcome under resources, there'll be better health, more water access, more access for farming, and so on. And these advantages go down all the way to the household and to the community. So what the matrix does, it is intertwining the relationship between labor, time, resources, and culture. But we were trying to see how this aspect is affecting our women, men, the household, and the community, looking at the different activities that are taking place in our community. All right, and then the other framework that we have here is the Web of Institutionalization framework. So the web is more of institution based, and because it's more of institution based, it is addressing issues based on policies, and it's also addressing issues based on institutions or policy related implementers. So for this case here, we are looking at what Levy was looking at what aspects are affecting gender and what are the key parts that can be looked into to influence the gender. So it's a very important tool if you're looking at gender mainstreaming that is done by institutions and different levels of organizations So Levy was addressing gender mainstreaming, but posing the challenge at institutional based. So they addressed gender mainstreaming institution for the development purposes. So what Levy did, he came up with like a web that has 13 interconnected challenges or 13 interconnected elements that are very key when you're looking at gender equality and policy planning. And for him, he was saying, for you to have proper gender mainstreaming and to ensure there's gender equality for proper policies and planning, then you need all these areas. You need enough resources, for instance, here. You need good policies in place. You need enough staff that are well developed. There's issues looking at procedures for the gender mainstreaming activities. And you need responsible or responsibilities. Who is responsible for what when it comes to the gender mainstreaming? There is political commitment or the political players who can commit into putting their time and into putting their resources into ensuring that the gender mainstreaming is taking place. Active participation and influence, looking at the roles, needs, and perspectives, research, theory development, methodology of implementation, and also program development. So you find that like the web doesn't look into one thing, it works around the 13 interconnected elements and then looks at what is needed and how to have each and all this in place. And then lastly, we have the 4R method. So the 4R method, we had not mentioned it on our list, but it's also a very key method that you need to know because what the 4R does, it brings out a picture of the gender patterns that exist in our system and what is their impact and what plan you can do to remedy the shortcomings. So the 4R method articulates it in 4 steps. So like it looks at 4 steps that you can use to ensure that there's a full representation or there's a full pattern of how the gender issues operate. So there's the first R of representation, resources, realia, and then realization. So if you're looking at the representation, then it's looking at surveying. So the first stage in the 4R stage method is they're saying that you first need to do the first R, and in the first R, you're going to survey. So like you're going to survey in an organization, for example, what is the gender distribution? So let's say in decision making, for example. So if you're doing the surveying in your gender issues, then you go and say, okay, in this organization, we have like 4 men who are the chief executives, and then maybe you have women who are maybe the subordinates or providers of other roles in the organization. So once you've established your representation, then you move to the second R, where you are examining allocation of resources. So how is the resources being distributed amongst men and women in terms of time, money, among others that are referring to resource-wise in that particular organization. And then the realia, or the third R, is analyzing conditions that help us to understand the reason for the gender distribution. Remember, I've already looked at the who are there and what role they're playing, but also you've looked at the resources that each and everyone there are accessing or being allocated into. But now the key part you need to know is why is the situation like that? So that is the realia, the third R. So with the third R, looking at the realia, you are understanding the reasons why the gender issues are like that. So why the men are that number and the women are that number, and why the men are controlling the particular resources and the women are controlling the other part. And when you've done that, you now come back and say, okay, we need to realize equality here. And so you move to the last R, which is realization. So with the last R and realization, so your role as a gender expert is coming up with an objective and then coming up with measures to help you see how do we achieve equality here. Like, do we now say, okay, let's reduce the executives. If there are 4 men, then what can't you say 2 men and 2 women so that you can have 50-50 representation on the executive board. And then if it's in the resources, you can say, okay, what if you have core authorities? And you can say any signatories. So in the signatories, you like, let's put partly a woman to participate in the giving of signatories. And while you're establishing all these stages where you've started with the representation, you've started with the resources, you've done the realia, and now you've realized, and you come up now with a collective bargain of how each and everyone will be sorted in this particular organization. So without realizing, you've actually achieved your gender equality, and you have brought in equal representation at the different levels. So that was it for this particular one, where we're looking at the gender analysis frameworks, and you've seen that there are many, but our key focus for now was the 4R, the gender matrix, the Moser conceptual framework, 13 web of institutionalization, and the Moser conceptual framework. So when you're looking in the framework, just take your time and then look at the one that applies to the gender analysis that you're going to conduct. Look at the community you're going into, look at the project you're planning to do, and then you choose one. So if this is work that you like, this is content that you wish to come more into, you can, subscribe and share with your friends. And until next time, thank you for being with us to the end, and you can see you in the next class.